A group of children is crawling on the sandy beach, each holding a metal rod. They tremble as they poke the sand in front of them. Suddenly, one boy hits something, and he quickly starts digging the sand just like I used to do when playing in the sand as a child. However, this is not just sand digging, it's uncovering a landmine. The boy carefully opens the mine to extract the incendiary device and successfully disarms it. Unfortunately, another boy with him isn't as lucky. He's like someone who's bitten into spoiled food and lies flat on a mine. He's been trying to disarm retching. This is a true story from Denmark. In 1945, as World War II came to an end, the German occupation of Denmark had lasted for 5 years. When the German forces withdrew, they left behind over 1.5 million landmines of various types and designs on the Danish coast, posing the greatest local danger. Denmark made the decision to have 2,000 German prisoners of war take on the task of clearing these mines. In the latter half of World War II, nearly all adult German men had been drafted or killed in action, so the remaining population consisted mainly of teenage boys. They had to use their bare hands to defuse the bombs their father's generation had left behind. Among those children, many had never seen what a landmine looked like. The Danish authorities conducted only basic training by showing them pictures and theoretical instruction. After that, each one would be given a real landmine to practice disarming. In a bunker, the first person went in, carefully opened the mine, removed the detonator, and successfully disarmed it. The second person did the same, and the third survived as well. The fourth, after entering, began to feel fearful. His hands trembled incessantly. The Danish sergeant, tired of waiting, entered to urge him. After coming out, he advised everyone to stay calm. Fortunately, in the end, he also succeeded in disarming the mine and taking it out. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The next person went in, and the explosions always came suddenly, leaving us uncertain of our fate. Outside, many young men were standing in line to join this deadly class, with mines that could go off at any moment. After a brief and intense training session, 11 teenage soldiers were taken to a scenic location, but it was filled with mines on the western coast of Denmark. The sergeant in charge was Karl. He saw the German prisoners of war, holding the Danish flag, approaching, and his anger boiled over. He was extremely resentful of those who had occupied his country. Karl confronted them and saw this group of young boys, barely in their teens, including a pair of twins. But to him, they were simply German soldiers, tools for mine clearance. Karl pointed to the distant sandy area marked with a black flag and surrounded by mines. They were instructed to clear 6 mines per hour, and in 3 months they would be allowed to return home. The boys immediately got to work. They lay on the sand, slowly inching forward with only a single tool in their hands, a metal rod. A single breath or a slight hand tremor could spell death for them. The younger twin, Ernst, spotted the first mine and, relying on the knowledge gained during training, carefully disarmed it. The first day of mine clearance proceeded without incidents, and there were no casualties. The boys stuffed dried grass into their canvas bags, using it as both bedding and a topic of discussion about what they would do when they got home. Only the oldest one in the group, Helmut, knew that their homes were merely a distant dream, that Denmark would not release them. However, the children still believed that Karl had promised them, so they were sure he would deliver. At the end of a day's work, with no one delivering food, Ernst, the younger twin, saw a Danish girl waiting nearby and struck up a conversation. She said her doll was injured, and Ernst used some gauze to help fix it. Then he helped the girl bandage her doll, and her mother, seeing this, quickly called her daughter home. Ernst took the opportunity to take a piece of the girl's bread, later sharing it with his brother. As night fell, Karl locked them in the wooden house. To prevent them from escaping, they used a wooden beam to bar the door every day. The hungry boys continued their mine clearance work, moving more slowly than the previous day. By evening, Captain Schumann arrived and asked Karl when they would get food. Karl calmly responded that the Germans would not receive food priority. He did not care whether the Germans died from mines or hunger. The starving children had no choice but to go to sleep. At this point, Helmut pried a board from the wall, expressing his intention to go outside and search for some food. Early the next morning, Ernst started running a fever and vomiting. Karl didn't allow them to rest, not even for an hour, and demanded they return to work immediately. The children had no choice but to quickly get back to work. And not long after, Wilhelm showed the same symptoms. He couldn't hold back the nausea. and Captain Schumann approached to inspect it. After the explosion, Wilhelm had both of his ears severed and he cried out in pain, saying he wanted to go home. His nearby friends helplessly witnessed this horrific scene. Ernst shouted for help, hoping someone would come to their aid, but a woman on the nearby farm coldly glanced at them and shut the door. Karl sat inside the house, pretending not to hear the cries until he heard Wilhelm call out for his mother, "Mom, I want to go home." At this point, he couldn't sit still any longer and went outside to administer a sedative to Wilhelm. Perhaps the plea for his mother made Karl realize that they were not just soldiers, but also children. Karl took Wilhelm to the hospital, and at this point, everyone displayed similar symptoms, suffering from mass vomiting. Helmut came forward and admitted that, due to extreme hunger the night before, he had secretly sneaked into a nearby farm and stolen some grain for them to eat. Karl questioned the woman working on the farm, and she revealed that the grain was infested with rat droppings. Anyone who ate it would become ill. Karl instructed the kids to continuously drink seawater until they vomited out the grain contaminated with rat droppings. After taking care of everything, Karl went to the hospital to check on Wilhelm's condition. But the nurse informed him that Wilhelm had already passed away. He began to feel guilty, thinking that if he had fed the children, Wilhelm might still be alive. So he secretly stole some bread from the military supplies, knowing that the lieutenant had observed all these actions. Karl threw the bread in front of the door, then opened it, waking up the children, and quickly left without acknowledging anything. After days of hunger, the children finally saw food, and they ate eagerly, their eyes filled with hope. Karl lied, saying that Wilhelm's wound was healing, and he would be going home soon. The children showed visible relief, but the loss of one member meant they had to redistribute the workload. Each child had to disarm 8 mines in 1 hour. 3 of them pushed a cart filled with mines while discussing their plans for the future when they returned home. Some wanted to have a beer, find a girlfriend, or work as construction laborers to rebuild their country. These children were trying to atone for the mistakes of their fathers, and they did not complain or hold any grudges. However, they still underestimated the Danish people's animosity towards them. Perhaps it was Karl's act of stealing bread for them, simply to provide a meal. That evening, Lieutenant Schumann brought a group of drunken soldiers to taunt the kids, calling them National Socialist youths. The boys couldn't fight back and could only cower on the ground. When their comrades intervened, the soldiers pointed their guns at their heads. As they prepared to open fire, Karl stepped in to prevent it, saying that if they killed these children, they would have to clear the mines themselves. The infuriated soldiers left. The lieutenant asked Karl if he had forgotten what the Germans had done to their country. Karl replied that the children didn't know what had happened, nor did they know why there were mines there. The next day, after Schumann disarmed a mine, he discovered a wire connected to an incendiary device. It was a dual-purpose mine designed to target mine clearers. Schumann shouted for everyone's attention, but they were too far apart. Ernst's twin brother, Werner, was celebrating having disarmed a mine and didn't hear the warning calls from his brother. When the dust cleared, Ernst was shocked to find his brother had completely disappeared right in front of him, leaving only a smoke-filled atmosphere. He ran to the spot, crying and calling his brother's name, but his brother had been blown apart by the explosion. Karl approached and held Ernst's hand, but there was nothing he could do. Ernst was extremely agitated, constantly saying he had to go back and find his brother. Karl administered a sedative to him. Karl sat beside Ernst, knowing that the young man before him was not a National Socialist, but a pitiable child who longed to return home, albeit now without his brother. Karl went over to Schumann, admitting that he had lied, and Wilhelm had passed away. Schumann replied that he had known for a while that the kids just wanted to clear the mines and perhaps return home alive. When Schumann touched his lucky charm, Karl said something he had never said before, reassuring him that everything would be fine. Schumann took the lucky charm off, intending to give it to Karl. Karl chuckled, as he realized it was a playful trick Schumann often used. That night, Karl didn't lock the door anymore. Instead, he placed a doorstop by the door. He then drove to the army base to secretly obtain some bread for the children. The kids were thrilled that day because Karl had given them a day off to play soccer on the beach together. They enjoyed this moment, perhaps as they should during their youth. Just when things seemed to be turning for the better, another explosion rang out. Karl's beloved pet dog had been killed in a section where mines were being cleared. Not all mines had been properly disarmed, and Karl felt that the children had deceived him. The Nazi regime had taken his loved ones, and now it had taken his beloved dog. The hatred within Karl reignited, and he once again became the same resentful overseer he had been before. The man responsible for mine clearance in that area claimed that all marked mines had been cleared. The quantity was accurate, and Karl counted them himself. He no longer cared about them and treated them like he would a dog. He began using his mouth to toss a ball and applauded their good behavior, then ordered them to get on the ground and bark like dogs. To recheck the minefield, he forced them to become human mine detectors, using their meals as bait. A young boy who had been slapped by Karl earlier voiced his opposition, but was met with Karl's furious strikes. The children held hands and formed a line, embarking on another death march, using their bodies to find the remaining mines. In Karl's eyes, there was no longer any sympathy. Denmark didn't want them, and Karl mistreated them. The slapped boy decided to escape, but Schumann still believed that if they cleared all the mines, Karl would release them and let them go home. However, the boy no longer trusted Karl. Schumann realized it was futile to persuade him further and called others to restrain him. Early the next morning, the cold and indifferent woman suddenly rushed into the children's area, sobbing and begging for her daughter. The boys immediately followed her out. It turned out her daughter had wandered into a minefield to play. Schumann swiftly dropped to the ground and prepared to use his mine detector. Karl went to the wooden house, finding the door wide open. Inside, only Ernst remained. He thought the others had escaped, so he walked to the beach and saw the children, still clearing mines and saving the woman's child. Schumann slowly crawled towards the girl while the woman prayed. Ernst unexpectedly went into the minefield, unafraid, and approached the girl. He tried to comfort her, just as he had before, helping her with her doll and speaking about his missing brother. The girl gently touched Ernst's hand as if consoling him. Ernst handed the girl to Schumann, but he stayed behind. Everyone called for him to return, but he only smiled and shook his head. He walked straight into the minefield, leaving the world without his twin brother. This was the only explosion that had been expected, a tragedy for the beautiful twins. Schumann, the most determined of the children, couldn't help but burst into tears. Karl approached him, comforted him, and told him they were about to go home. Karl sat alone looking ahead, his emotions heavy as he recalled the young men who had perished before his eyes. The children continued to clear the mines. 3 months of living in constant fear were almost over. This was the area with the last bombs on the beach. They were about to go home. 6 children were transporting the disarmed mines onto a truck. They were joyfully discussing their future plans. One wanted to open a restaurant to enjoy lots of food. One longed for their mother's cooking. One even shared their home address to invite everyone over, and others had their own dreams. Then suddenly, a massive explosion swept in, plunging a corner of the sky into a cloud of darkness. Karl and his friends, who were busy clearing mines, rushed over. The scene had turned into a pile of rubble. 6 teenagers, remembering their homes, were now charred. The camera captured the 4 faces of the young boys who had completed their mine clearance tasks on time. But despite finally being able to go home, there was no joy on their youthful faces. Karl and the mother with her 2 sons at the farm watched as the truck drove away. However, instead of going home, they were taken to a larger minefield. Because they had experience in mine clearance, now they faced 72,000 more mines. It turns out that all the promises of going home were lies from high-ranking officials. Initially, the lieutenant had no intention of letting these children survive and return to their country. He hoped they would die like flies. Karl was deceived too, and he wanted to keep the word of a soldier. So he argued with the lieutenant and even used threats to release the children. But the lieutenant continued to refuse Karl. The leader of the mine-clearing team received a letter, and then 4 children stepped out of the lineup. They were then put on a vehicle, not knowing whether this vehicle was headed to a new minefield or meant to execute them. Finally, they saw Karl again, who had promised to send the children home. This location was about 500 meters from the border, and they could return to their country if they ran for it. Karl made a decision, issued a fake order, and released the 4 children alive after the mine clearance, allowing them to cross the border and return to their home country. From a military perspective, he violated orders, but from a humanitarian standpoint, he acted out of kindness. This act removed the hatred and enmity from his heart, as these children had disarmed the bombs of hatred within him. The movie concludes here, and it's titled Land of Mine. The question for this round is, do you think making these children pay for the mistakes of the past generation is right or wrong? If you think it's right, please comment number 1. If you think it's wrong, please comment number 2. Thank you for your attention and for following along. Goodbye, and see you next time.